Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Stone, as you know, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this lesson in the updated Freedom Practice training. We're going to be working with muscle testing today, using muscle testing to compare experiential and cognitive data. The muscle testing process, we have within us an underutilized ability to know things through direct experience. Learning to use muscle testing cultivates an integration between the subtle senses and the gross physical senses. This naturally results in an increase in trusting your intuitive knowing. Learning and using muscle testing greatly enhances intuition and emotional competence. How it works. There's a man named Marconi, Italian guy, who invented the radio. We probably can't invent anything that we don't already have inside of us in some form. A radio has an antenna to pick up the radio signals. It has a bandpass filter to only allow one broadcast signal through the amplifier, and a tuner to adjust the bandpass filter to a different station. It also has an amplifier to make the faint signal loud enough to hear it. And we have similar functions within us. Our internal radio consists of an antenna function, and we're picking up all the electromagnetic fields of everything around us all the time. We can feel if someone is upset, even when there's no obvious body language. We have a bandpass filter function. We seem to have the ability to filter out the signal of one person. This is like a bandpass filter. It lets us isolate the signal of that person from everyone else's signals. We have a tuner to adjust the bandpass filter to a different station. Our intention seems to be like a tuner. When I decide to test for you, my system filters out everyone else. The amplifier is to make the faint signals sound loud enough to hear it. And the muscle's response is a kind of amplifier. It amplifies the weak signal to make it strong enough that the result is much more obvious. It brings a signal from the subtle sensory level, where we're just experiencing it in our consciousness, to the level of the gross physical senses. This rapidly produces a kind of integration between the subtle senses and the gross physical organs of sensing. So how can we test for someone who's on the other side of the world? Well, one theory is what is called neutrinos. Neutrinos are the smallest subatomic particles that there are. And they're created in the stars, and they're sort of spewed out in every direction, untold gazillions of them, and they move nearly at the speed of light. They pick up the information of what they pass through, and then they deposit the information on what they pass through next. We're penetrated by millions of neutrinos every second. And we're getting all the information about everything in the universe in every moment. Tuning in, our intention to test for one specific person or for a group filters out all the other information that we're receiving. We only allow the intended information through our amplifier. Why test for discrepancies? When there's a mismatch between what you think and what you experience, there's an inner conflict. Inner conflicts sabotage our intentions and our life. To resolve inner conflicts, we have to know how to find them. Once we find them, we have to know how to resolve them. We need a way to have experiential knowledge that a conflict has been identified and resolved. Muscle testing can be used to accomplish this. So the first thing we do is talk about getting the basics. Sensitizing to the experience of congruence. There's a match between thinking and knowing. And with discrepancy, there's a mismatch between thinking and knowing. establishing a baseline of rapport if you're working with a client, and the timing, which is allowing time for a physiological response. I'm going to just show you. In the freedom practice, we train only in how to do muscle testing on yourself. Now, you can do it for other people as well using your fingers, but when you're working with someone in person, typically you sit like across from them and you muscle test their arm. You have them hold out their arm, you have them say a statement, and then you press on the arm. And if it stays strong like this, then that's a congruence indicator. Okay, that means there's a match between what they're saying and what their body has experienced. And if you have them say the intention or statement and you test and the arm goes down, then that's a weak response, and that indicates that there's a difference between what they're thinking or saying and what they've experienced. It's a test for congruence or discrepancy between the mind and body, basically. Muscle testing is also sometimes called intuition testing. We were calling that for a while. And once we have these basics down of knowing that we're testing to either get congruence or discrepancy, once we've established a rapport with a client, like if we're doing it online, like we're doing this class, we can establish the rapport by having them say their name, and they say, my name is Tom, and we test and we get a yes. They say, my name is Sally, and we test and we get a no. And this starts to create a kind of linkage and communication between the person who's being muscle tested for and the person who's doing the muscle testing. And then the timing is also something important. We need to have enough time to let the signal get to the muscles and respond to them. And if we don't allow for enough time, then it's a little bit like you say, my name is Tom. See, I tested too soon. My name is Tom. But if I say my name is Tom, then I give a chance for the muscle to respond and it stays strong. If I test too soon, then I get a mistaken answer. Did you see that, Josh? Yeah, okay. All right, so back to the screen share. Yeah. So when you're testing on yourself, the important thing is to properly formulate the testing statements. And also the sequence of those statements. So that's what you need in order to be able to find the path of inquiry to find any discrepancies that might be there so that you can then resolve them using pure awareness techniques or whatever is appropriate. So assumptions are a mental construct. They don't give you accurate data about discrepancies or congruence. So what do? We always test. When in doubt, test. Even when you're not in doubt, test, okay? We have, as I mentioned in the last class, we have this one rule, only one rule in freedom practice and inner greatness optimizing, and that is test everything, muscle test everything. It's like a light switch. When the light switch is off, the circuit is open. That means that the connection between the switch and, say, a light bulb, there's no connection because the energy can't run when the circuit is open like that. So when the circuit is closed, when the switch is on, then the energy can flow and you get the light bulb goes on. So to test on yourself, one of the advantages is that it's fast. It's much faster than testing with someone's arm. And use the muscles of the fingers and hand. You've watched me do it many times. You've already learned how to do it, I think, most of you. And finding the way that works best for you. There are several different ways. I'm just going to demonstrate again. There's two-handed way where you make a circle with one hand and you put your finger inside the circle and you push up against the opening. And if it doesn't go through, that means you've got a match. It's a congruent, strong response of the muscle. But if it goes through, this means you have a mismatch. You've got the thinking and experiencing are not the same. Okay. There's another way, which is to do it the way I've been doing it most of the time, which is you bend the thumb a little bit and you sort of lock this muscle. Then you stick the tip of the index finger into the pad of the muscle. And when you test, you push the index finger out as if to release it. But if it doesn't release, which means the thumb muscle stays strong, that's just like the arm muscle staying strong, or like the little O staying strong. Some people do it this way, some people do it this way. Yeah. But the one that I've become the fondest of is just this one. It's very simple, easy to do. Push up against the thumb. If it doesn't go, then it's strong. If it goes, then it's weak. I used to also do it this way when I first learned. I did it with one finger on top of the other one, and strong was staying like this, weak was staying like that. But I find this one much more relaxed and easy to do. So you find the way that works best for you. And I recommend that you both learn a one-handed way and a two-handed way. So if you're busy with some checking a list on some paperwork or something, or one hand is busy with whatever, then you can test with one hand and still get a good result. Learning to trust the results, this is an important part. And problems that are encountered when you're doing this self-testing is identifying discrepancies affecting your testing, sensing the result before you test. And we talked about this, I think, in the previous lesson, at least in the Q&A, which I'm not sure was on the recording, so we'll definitely cover it in this recording. So I'll explain this one again without the PowerPoint in just a moment. So when you think you're biasing the result, this is actually not what's happening. Something else is happening, and I'll explain it more in a moment. You let go of this notion and you test. It's just a confirmation of your experiential knowing. The side benefit of practicing self-muscle testing is this dramatically cultivates trusting your intuition. Coming back to this one, when you do the test and you do it again, one of the things that happens, and this happens to a lot of people, particularly early in their learning of muscle testing, the distinction that's important is the distinction between the energy pattern of the intention and the verbal linear description of the intention. If I say my name is Tom, then there's a pattern of energy that is present right in the moment where I have the intention to say my name is Tom. The body senses the pattern of the energy of the intention because it's moving much, much faster than the words that describe it. It's kind of like a note on a piano. You play an A 440 note above middle C on the piano, and it's vibrating 440 times per second. Right? That's per second, not per minute. Right? So it's similar with intention. The verbal part of the intention is like playing the note and holding it for a long time, but the actual energy pattern of the intention is vibrating many, many times during that whole period. And so when you first start to have the vibration sensed by your body, what can happen is you have the thought to test something, and you go to begin thinking or saying the statement, and you can already feel that the muscle, like in this case, the muscle of the thumb, it's already strengthening. It's already tightening up to indicate that you have a congruence with what it is you're saying. Or it's not strengthening, and you can feel that if you push, it's going to go right off. And this being able to sense the energy, the body's ability to sense the energy before formulating the verbal description of the intention is something that throws many people off in the beginning. What they do is they can feel it's getting strong and they think, oh, I can't trust this. I'm biasing the result. They think they're making it be strong. But it's not like that. This is a misinterpretation of what's happening. What's actually happening is you're simply having the body start to respond to the pattern of energy of the intention rather than the verbal description. Now, why does this happen? This happens because self-muscle testing didn't used to be a very common thing. all muscle testing was done using some part of the body, like the chiropractors would do something with your legs or your feet. And other people, different systems of kinesiology, if they did it with the arm, when you test, you'd have to wait until the person said the statement. So you'd say, my name is Tom. You'd wait half a second, let the energy get to the deltoid muscles, which is what you're testing when you're doing it this way. And you push and it would be strong. Okay? And so this habit of waiting until you've said the statement and then waiting even a half second more, this has been a long-term pattern of the way people have done muscle testing when in person. But when you're doing it on yourself, it's a different story. You're not having to wait to say the intention. The body's picking up the energy of the intention immediately and starting to respond, give you a strong or weak response. Is it clear? Okay, good. Good. Yeah, this is an important one. And when you're, if you become a mentor or a teacher of this work, you're going to want to know this kind of thing because this comes up very frequently, particularly in the beginning for people. So the next topic is incorporating intuition testing or muscle testing into your life. We're going to talk about this distinction between intuition testing and decision making. We're only checking for whether there's a discrepancy or congruence between the mind and the body. We're not making decisions when you're not clear about what to do. It's not for that. So don't try and use muscle testing to shortcut the decision-making process. Don't try to circumvent the need to wait for clarity. You'll be fooling yourself because you'll get an answer and you'll think that it's right. What you want to do is instead use the muscle testing to identify and remove any blocks that you have to clarity and only make decisions from clarity. And if you're not clear yet, wait for the clarity or remove any more blocks that there may be for the clarity. Don't try to circumvent the clarity with intuition testing, muscle testing. Now, we have something called cross-testing, and this is extremely valuable. This is a key to eliminating doubt. What you do is you test once and you get an answer. Then you reformulate the testing statement so that you'll get the opposite response from the muscle, but you'll get the same fundamental information. An example is, this energy is completely resolved. This is a test like at the end of a session or at the end of doing a technique. Say, this energy is completely resolved, and you test and you get a strong response. And then the cross test could be something like, and there could be many different versions, there's more to this energy that still needs to be located and resolved. And if that's a weak response, that weak response is a confirmation of the statement above, which is the energy is completely resolved. Cross-testing is an essential part of having a good path of inquiry. It's kind of like you're finding your way through the swamp and you got to know where to step next. You don't know whether you're going to step on a landmine or a rock or whatever. So what you want to do is test and then cross-test. And if you have to, test again and cross-test again. And you keep cross-testing until there's a sense inside of knowing that the answer that you've got is one that's valid. This means that both tests produce the same result, even though the muscle response is the opposite, as I just demonstrated. So if you still have doubts, reformulate the statement in yet another way and retest again. Once in a way that creates a strong response and once in a way that creates a weak response, but in both cases gives you the same information. Talking about the use of intuition testing, muscle testing, intuition testing tells you what you're resonating with. It doesn't tell you whether something is true or false. That's a judgment. Intuition simply means that you're currently resonating with something. If it is something that you don't want to be resonating with, you can check to see if you have an inner conflict. If you do, test to see what techniques are needed and use locate to access the energy and resolve them. If you don't, you can simply make a decision if you're clear about what to do. If you're not clear, and there are no barriers, then it is simply not time to know yet. Wait for clarity. Intuition testing to see about your resonance with all kinds of things. When buying supplements, you can test to see if what you're considering is optimal for your body, health, well-being, etc. The benefit of using intuition testing is that it brings you out of your mind and into your body where your true knowing resides. Everything has an electromagnetic field, and your body can sense that. It can tell whether you resonate with something or not. Let's do a little practicing. We can take some very simple stuff at first. Generally speaking, if you want to just create rapport with someone, you can have them say yes. This is pretty much everyone resonates with yes, and then you can test and get a strong response. And the other way of doing it is you have them say no, you test and you get a weak response. So Jaz, I'd like you to test Carolyn with this yes and no, and I want you to hold your hand up so I can watch you test.
Okay, so then Carolyn says yes, and then I have to test.
That's right.
Yeah, all right.
So you have to instruct people.
Yeah, okay. So Carolyn, please say yes.
There you go.
Yes.
Strong. Good. Okay. And the cross test.
Yeah. So now please say no.
No.
Right.
Yeah. So
and how's it feel, Jaz? Does it feel pretty easy to get the distinction?
Yeah, it is noticeable, but I also had a question about this, so maybe I could ask it now.
Perfect.
Because what I noticed is that sometimes I get a very clear and strong response, and sometimes I get a very clear weak response, but sometimes I also get a strong-ish response or a weak-ish response. And I don't really know why that is. Often it's still clear enough to see it, but it also confuses me a bit.
Right. So the important thing to understand in this regard is that what we're doing is we're using our muscles in a new way that we haven't been used to using them before. And that's we're using them as a methodology for comparing our cognitive and our experiential data. And what that means is that when we're going to make that comparison, we have to formulate that which we're testing in a way that will give us a true read on whether there's a congruence or a discrepancy between what we're thinking, saying, and what we're experiencing. Now, sometimes the formulating of the intention is not clear enough. And when it's not clear enough, then the test for the congruence or discrepancy will be, it'll have sort of some element of doubt in it. It could have, yeah. And when that's the case, then you'll get this kind of, is it really strong? Is it really weak? You know, you'll get some doubt about the actual experiential part. And so when you get that doubt, that's the perfect time to cross-test, making sure that the cross-testing statements are very well, clearly, simply formulated. Yeah.
Okay.
So when you get the sort of quasi result from the muscle test and you have a doubt about it, then what you can muscle test right then is one of the first cross tests is say, cross-testing would improve this experience, yeah, or cross-testing is needed in order to further clarify the response, and then you test again. So you can use even statements like that to help you ensure that what you're doing, because what you want is a consistent, clear, strong response and a consistent, clear, weak response, okay? No mushiness in between, yeah. And so to recognize that there's typically, if there's mushiness in between, that means there's some reason, okay? And primarily, it's not that you've got suddenly some disease in your fingers. It's that you've got some lack of clarity about your intention. And this brings up a very interesting point. You know, there have been studies done by scientists trying to prove that muscle testing works or doesn't work. But most of them, being scientific, they see the world as that which you can see with your senses, right? And they also see the world as them wanting to objectively verify something by seeing to it that everybody's getting the same kind of result. Right? Now, the problem with this scientific research is that muscle testing is not a science, it's an art. Right? It's not something that is automatically going to give you clear, strong, or weak responses, just as we're just describing and talking about, right?
Yeah.
So to do a study, if the designer of the study has the intention to disprove that muscle testing is reliable, guess what? That's what he's going to get. Yeah. So the whole notion of trying to objectify something that's highly subjective is a kind of mistaken notion. And certainly the people who are testing to see if muscle testing works, they don't have all the details and subtleties of what it's about that we're talking about here. They just see it being done and say, oh, that's ridiculous, because they're coming from a objective scientific mindset. And the thing is that there are aspects of the muscle testing that are not objective. They're very much subjective. Just as you say, you have to kind of cultivate what the feeling of strong and weak is. Right?
Yeah.
It's important. And the whole cross-testing concept is to help to avoid falling into the trap of thinking in the wrong way, right? Of thinking about it in the wrong way. Because if you have doubts, you're going to get doubtful muscle testing results. But if you're really clear about your intention and you have no doubts about it, and you also do the cross testing is a kind of doubt obliterator. It really helps to, if you do a cross test and you don't feel like solidly clear about it, you just do more cross tests and you do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can do a whole bunch of cross tests until, okay, all right, already it's working.
Okay, yeah. Could it also have to do with timing? I was thinking maybe that could also be a factor.
Absolutely. And of course, well, you can kind of test for that as long as you get the timing of that test okay.
Yeah, otherwise you're just downward to spiral.
Yeah, you just get the feel for the timing. It doesn't take long for the muscle to respond when you're doing the self-test. I say, my name is Tom, and I press. And the wait is like a fraction of a second, but there is a little bit of a wait just to allow time for the nerve impulse to get down the nerve to the muscles and allow the contraction of the muscle to take place.
Yeah,
so
okay.
the way to get the right timing is to experiment with it until you know, oh yeah, I got the timing down.
Okay. Yeah.
And then of course you can always test. It can even be better. Good questions. Great.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions about the doing of the muscle testing? Carolyn has taught muscle testing to thousands of people, I think. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, at this very time, things are happening. So I wanted to share it with you. I'm just getting constant ons. So I can say my name is Tom and it's strong, and I can say my name is Carolyn and it's strong. And so I'm watching this happen to this process, and I'm just going back in my past. What I learned was sometimes it's the instrument, and you drink water so that your electrical system is open, or you do cross crawls so that your left, right, back, front brain is operating, or you can hold different points in your body to have the instrument's energy flow correct itself. So I did that, and then it helped me to work on the instrument.
Okay, and did it solve the problem completely or only partially?
No, I can. That's what I do when I do my work. I'll just say, "Give me a yes," and I'll muscle check. Give me a no, and I'll muscle check. And if at that point my instrument is giving me wonky, if they're both yes, they're both strong, or they're both weak, then I just do my little energetics or water or whatever to work with my instrument. So
That's a really good point. So this thing about drinking water, I've learned this too. Actually, Carolyn and I learned muscle testing from the same teacher, different courses, but from the same teacher years ago. And this drinking water or doing what are called cross crawls, which is a kind of little exercise where you reach over with your arm and leg and you have them cross and touch, and then you reach the other way and cross and touch. And what that does apparently is it kind of syncs up the hemispheres of the brain to do that. So there are a number of little techniques that can be done to fix the muscle testing if it's not working. And I had the intention many years ago to have a kind of sequestered part of muscle testing that will always work, even to use it to help solve muscle testing problems.
Uh-huh.
Kind of interesting, like a kind of one of those sort of always on programs on the computer where it's always working, so.
Sure.
Yeah. So there are some things like that that can be done. They're useful. The key thing is there's a concept about not using muscle testing to make decisions. You want to make decisions from clarity. And if you're not clear, it means either there's some barriers to clarity or it's not time to know yet. So if I say, I have barriers to clarity, I get a no. I say, I just need to wait for the clarity because it's not time to know yet. I get a yes. That's a really good cross test.
Mm-hmm.
Because now I know I just need to wait. I don't need to go drink water or do something like that. Cross testing is the key to having muscle testing be reliable. And you can see that you need to be able to subjectively formulate the cross test statement so that it really does do its job of confirming the other information by getting the opposite response. There's a concept of a path of inquiry, which I mentioned in the PPT. And the path of inquiry means you make one test, and based on that test, you can then go in a particular direction. And so you go in that direction, and then you make another set of cross tests, and that maybe guides you in yet another direction. And so the sequence of inquiries that you make determines the path of inquiry, and that's how you get to find where the discrepancy lies in the picture so that you can then use pure awareness techniques or whatever approach you're going to use to fix it. You can then use that to solidify the clarity. But the fundamental principle is don't make decisions with muscle testing, just make decisions from clarity. You can muscle test, I am clear enough to make the proper decision for myself. Yes, but even if you have doubts about that, make another cross test. It would be better to continue clearing out any subtle barriers there might be to having absolute clarity. Yeah, there's something in there. Okay. I don't know if I told you this story. There was a guy in one of the classes I took, Carolyn, who tried to use muscle testing to make a spaghetti sauce. How much and what ingredients? And he finished, and apparently it was terrible. So this is a good example of a misuse of muscle testing. We don't want to use it to circumvent the lack of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key principle. Okay, everybody got it? All right, so this is not a very long class. The main thing about muscle testing is it gets better and better and better with practice until it just becomes a kind of a part of what you do, because we're not used to using the muscle's response as an indicator of whether we're congruent with something or whether there's a discrepancy. It does take a little while to cultivate the sense of using it for that purpose. And it does get better over time. I remember when I first learned it this way, and also this way. And I could do the one-handed, I could do the two-handed one pretty quickly, but it took me about a month to get this one to work. But when I shifted over to this, now it's like I just mainly teach it this way now because people seem to find this the easiest way. So there we go. Any further questions or comments?
Yeah, I have two more questions.
Go for it.
One was, why should you also test when you're not in doubt? Because I can imagine first you're just completely run by ego assumptions, and then it is sort of a level up to use the intuition test in the muscle testing. But then you could also argue that at a certain point you get to a place where your intuition and your sensitivity is so refined that you don't even need to do this kind of thing anymore, because you just directly know.
You're absolutely right. Okay. But this then becomes the way that you communicate what you're doing with your client if you're working with a client. But for yourself, I mean, we do have it's both old and new. We have a system called waveform optimizing, which is where we use the muscle testing to identify the shape of the waveform of some pattern of energy. And the way it's done is by testing for the frequency and then testing for the relative amplitude of some number of harmonics, maybe a dozen harmonics. And when you plug those numbers into this elaborate spreadsheet, it actually graphs the form of the wave. And if you change the amplitude of any of the harmonics, the waveform changes, right? And when the waveform changes, it's like playing the same note, but on a different instrument. Yeah, because like when you play that A440 on a trumpet, sounds very different than the piano, sounds very different than the guitar, sounds very different than the clarinet or the oboe or the bassoon. But each of those instruments is playing the same fundamental frequency. What's different is the harmonic content is different. So we now have a whole system called waveform optimizing. It's one of the advanced trainings, and it's pretty incredible because you can get to the form of the wave. It even calculates how many of them are going to happen when you're sitting there for 2 minutes, just letting the body cancel out the waveform or strengthen it, whichever it's doing. So at some point in the future, you'll be delighted to take this advanced training called waveform optimizing. It goes even much deeper into what we're doing. Great. Good. Any other questions? Yeah, you said you had two. What's the other question?
Yeah. So the other one was, you said when we talked about the science that the muscle testing has some subjective element to it. So that's tricky scientifically to test. And I was thinking, on the other hand, you also talk about electromagnetism and neutrinos. So you're trying to sort of place it in a physical physics way.
Scientific, yeah.
So I was wondering, do you have any literature about that sort of tries to understand energy and subtle perception and those things, maybe also muscle testing tries to combine it with sort of modern physics and our modern scientific understanding?
I don't have something specifically like that, although it's a very good idea. The tricky part of presenting something like that is that because there does seem to be some significant, let me say it this way. If you make a statement like in words, okay, and Carolyn makes the same statement in words, even though the words are the same, there's probably going to be subtle differences to what you mean and what she means, because she's got a whole life experience that's different than yours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that life experience kind of taints or colors the real intention that the words are attempting to describe. So one of the beauties of this waveform optimizing is you don't have to describe the waveform with words. You can describe it mathematically. So that makes it actually more scientific in a sense. It makes it more precise because you're just testing for the pattern of the energy of the intention, not for a linear, verbal, very possibly inadequate description of the waveform. Is that helpful?
So for example, with this waveform, you say there's a pattern of energy. And now I was wondering, how should I understand this in scientific terms? What do you mean with energy exactly? Do you have any books about that or ideas?
So here's one I did on myself. I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday. Yeah, I think it was last night. I was coming down with a slight sore throat. And I decided to do waveform optimizing to cancel out the energy of whatever it was that was causing a sore throat. Maybe it was the beginning of some bacteria or virus or something like that. So I first muscle tested the frequency. Oh, let me see. I don't think you can see the screen.
No.
Yeah, I'm going to do a screen share so you can see this because it's kind of cool. So this is a spreadsheet that you can plug in the data and it graphs the waveform. The one on the top is the waveform of whatever it is you're testing for. The one on the bottom is the calculated perfect mirror image of it. You can see the crest here and the trough here are perfectly opposed. Right? And so if you create this waveform and you put it together with this one, they're going to cancel each other out. Make sense? This works just like a noise canceling headset. Right? So first I found the frequency, then I muscle tested the relative amplitude, which are like fractions of the amplitude. Whatever the amplitude is, we don't have to find the decibels, okay? We can just call whatever the amplitude is 1, and then the harmonics will tend to be, there'll almost always be some fraction of that. Sometimes the harmonics can be stronger than the fundamental, like bells can have harmonics that are louder than the fundamental frequency, things like that. So in any case, muscle test for each of these values, and you get very fast at it. You get so fast that you don't have to even muscle test. You just say the intuitive number, like the 0.5, and you just know from doing gazillion muscle tests, you just know that that's right. You don't even have to test. This is partial answer to your earlier question. So then what happens is it has other aspects to it, which I won't go into in depth because this is not a class for that. But what happens is you get to the point where you can, it incorporates homeopathy, it incorporates some stuff from 5-element theory from Chinese medicine. It's a very comprehensive program. In any case, you create the mirror image of the problem and it goes away. And if you don't want to create the problem, you want to just strengthen something that's good, then you ignore the bottom line and you just have this test be for finding the energy that you're going to amplify. And then you do whatever pure awareness techniques are needed to allow that to actually occur. So at some point, you may have...
So then what is energy? You have this wave. I mean, when you have sound, you have a wave form in air, right? Now you say this is a pattern of energy that this waveform is expressing, but what do you think energy is?
Probably an electromagnetic field.
Okay.
Because everything has an electromagnetic field that radiates out from it and creates a field. So if we're testing something in the body, it's probably not a sound, although a sound might be a healing technique we would use to change it. That's possible. But the energy itself is probably of a cell or of a pathogen or a toxin. So basically, that's the story with muscle testing. Hope you enjoyed it. And the main thing that you need to do with this is practice makes perfect. The next class is going to be a class on removing any primal kind of barriers that people have to being able to trust themselves. Because you have to trust yourself in order to trust your muscle testing. Right? And one of the principal barriers to trusting yourself is, I mentioned in the previous class, is the fear of being punished. It's also the same thing as the fear of confrontation. So the fear of being punished is something we'll go into in detail tomorrow, but this is when you do something that your parents wouldn't want you to do and you get punished for it, and here you are just innocently exploring your world and you get punished. Then it doesn't take too many of those experiences before you have the intuition or the creative impulse to do something, and immediately following it, there's this fear there's going to be all hell to pay if you actually follow that intuition or that creative idea. So we're going to remove any kind of residual trauma that might be there from those kind of experiences when you were young or whenever. And this will help to free up the ability to trust yourself more. This also might be related to that mushy response you were talking about that you get.
Okay.
could be related to that. So that's the goal of the next class, is to make the muscle testing as really good as possible and to remove any doubts about it, to make it as reliable as possible. So that'll be our next class.